To talk about Chapter 1 policies and do that workshop. Thank you so much, sir.
Mrs. Rico?
Thank you. Just while Mr. Harris is coming forward to present these policies in development or for development, these are policies that involve the board organization, board-appointed advisory committees, et cetera. So they were called legal policies. We're bringing them forward on your behalf so the board could consider any of the tweaks, changes, some made necessary by legal requirements and changes of statute, others that are being recommended for your consideration for the best practices. Mr. Harris has prepared this presentation and will be brief and then taking your questions.
It's not the Mr. Harris we know and love, I'll tell you that.
Good afternoon, board members and superintendent. I plan to go over with you several revisions to 5 policies in Chapter 1. The first one I want to mention is Policy 1.09, which is on board advisory committees. And this policy provides standards that govern the operations and procedures of our advisory committees unless the policy for that committee states otherwise. And the revisions to this policy, most of them were proposed, were provided to the advisory committees to see if they had any input. Okay, the proposed changes on this are for the board to vote to approve persons recommended by a board member and to require a resume of the applicant, that for recommended appointees, the board shall be provided resumes, as I stated, that if the proposed appointee is a current employee or has a potential conflict of interest, that person would seek a written opinion from the Florida Ethics Commission, which could be an informal opinion, that appointees be given a copy of the district's lobbyist policy, and that's something that was not there at the time of the last set of revisions. And the audit committee made a recommendation, which we've added, that if the committee votes to recommend the 4-term limitation for the chair be extended, that this recommendation would be presented to the board for a vote, and if approved, the committee's chair would be considered as elected for the upcoming year, so the organization meeting for that committee would not need to include electing a chair. But note, this particular provision was presented to Cork, who discussed it, and they did not see a need for this change. And by the way, their policy has the current language that's in the board policy on this, and they even suggested deleting the chair term limitation provision. The policy also adds language on legislative updates on how to conduct public comment, which includes setting time limitations. The next policy is Policy 1.08, expenditures.
Hold on. Why don't we discuss?
You want to do one at a
Yes.
time? Fine.
Go ahead. Ms. Brew?
Thank you, and I do have a question for you. So we have not been requiring resumes to this point, right?
No, we have.
We have for everybody? Oh,
Yes.
okay, so then maybe.
To my knowledge, for everybody, but it wasn't in the policy before.
Because I'm thinking like my appointee to academic advisories retired for many, many years. And I know that we have other retirees on the committees. If we haven't been, and we have retirees that are appointed, they may not have a resume.
I haven't administered it, but to my knowledge, we've had resumes for applicants. Carol might be able to address that.
We
The
use a
board clerk.
bio also, so a retired person can use a bio.
So then as a follow-up, when we revise the policy, we need to state that it would be a resume and/or bio. Thank you.
Mr. Whitfield?
Since we're making comments as we go along, I just thought I'd mention, I really feel like term limits are a gift to the people on these things, so they don't feel like they have no choice but to be on these committees forever. So I'm fine with Cork coming back to us every time that they want to extend or, waive the term limits. But I think, it's respectful of all these volunteers to say this is a 2-year term and then you can leave if you want to, because it is a lot of work we ask of them. So just an opinion. Thank you.
Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. So we do ask a lot of our volunteers on these advisory committees, and I brought it up before. I'm going to bring it up now since we're on 1.09, and that's the issue of the residency requirement. So I want to thank you, Mr. Harris, for the chart you created about each of the policies and the statement on residency. I want to clarify, 1.096 Tech Committee is not on here for revisions today, but as I read this chart, it appears, if I'm reading this correctly, we had a residency requirement in that policy that we removed in 2011? Or it never addressed it?
No. Apparently, when it was revised, they removed the language, but the language of 1.09 still applies,
Right.
which is a residency requirement.
Right, and so my point is, I don't have any independent recollection of the conversation in 2011 when we removed the residency requirement from 1.096. I understand that the residency requirement 1.09 applies, and that's why I'm bringing this conversation up now since we're discussing 1.09. I think that each of us makes a point of selecting outstanding individuals to serve, to volunteer on these advisory committees. You know, they cannot be people who are doing business with the school district, and also many of them require a lot of time. So quite honestly, I have difficulty finding people that I think bring the added voice to these advisory committees because of those time restrictions and not doing business with the school district. Cork particularly has been hard to get people who have the background in construction-related fields who are not trying to make money off the school district right now. But so my request is that we remove this impediment of the residency. I would like to see us add language similar to what's in the District Diversity and Equity Committee, which states all members and alternate members must be residents of Palm Beach County or persons with an office in Palm Beach County and providing services deemed beneficial to the students of Palm Beach County. I would like to take that for 1.09 and tweak it just a bit. I don't have the exact language. I would leave it to legal to help us with that. But basically, people that if they don't live in Palm Beach County, they have a demonstrated vested interest in the well-being of citizens in Palm Beach County. And we have to approve. We see the resumes. We vote on the advisory committee members who are recommended by each of us. So it's not like people would be sneaking in the back door from Broward or Dade or wherever. We would see it. And so I'm going to ask for my fellow board members to consider directing legal to make such changes to 1.09.
Dr. Robinson, personally, I have no issue with it for some of the committees, but we have to be careful because 1.09 is like I remember when we changed this policy back in 2011, we were trying to get rid of the redundancy between the specific board policy that governed each one of the committees and this one that covers all committees. For example, ISOC, I mean, those should be taxpayers of Palm Beach County for sure because it's tax dollars that they're looking at. So we just have to be careful if we add the residency requirements, some modification that we don't affect those committees where there absolutely should be taxpayers on those committees.
So as I recall, I don't have it in front of me, but as I recall, ISOC and IROC, the seats are defined by organizational members and not appointed by us. And maybe Mr. Harris can clarify that, but I don't think we could put a non-resident on there by virtue of the organizational seat.
Well, I don't have the policies in front of me at the moment. I do know that some organizations definitely, make appointees to those committees, but those committees do have residency requirements at the moment. It's either in the policy or in 109, which governs it.
Okay, so we're not talking about 109 right now.
I understand.
I'm trying to change 109, so the issue on the table is whether or not ISOC and IROC, because I would agree with Mr. Barbieri, I would think that the handling of Palm Beach County taxpayer dollars exactly, like with a narrow focus on that, would be Palm Beach County taxpayers. And I'll pull up the policies. I mean, I think that they are filled by organizations from Palm Beach County. So if I'm incorrect, let me just put it this way. If I'm incorrect, I would exempt ISOC and IROC from my request.
I should mention that both those policies are specific and state that you have to be a resident of Palm Beach County.
They are. Okay.
Mrs. Rico?
Just to clarify, so we'll go back, if it's the board's direction, and tweak work with some language as described by Dr. Robinson, and carve out the IROC and ISOC committees specifically so that they would not be affected by any change in residency.
Perhaps you can bring back a list of all the different advisory committees, so we make sure there's not another one that we really want residents to...
Correct. Since this is workshopping.
Take a look at all of them to make sure that Cork is obviously one that we don't have, I don't particularly have an issue with. I don't think Dr. Robinson obviously does either, but there may be one of the other ones. But while we're on the subject of modifying policies, while you're looking at that, I recently tried to appoint, which I ended up getting, as an appointment of a teacher to the Academic Advisory Committee, which and the board had to vote on a waiver, and I asked you earlier today, Mr. Rico, can we just get a general, the Attorney General global opinion that teachers can serve, educators can serve on the academic advisory committee, even though they're employees of the district, rather than having the teacher or the educator have to go through this waiver process with all that. There was a lot of paperwork for the teacher to complete, which seems foolish, because if any committee should have a teacher on it, it should be the academic advisory committee, I would think, because they're the ones that are teaching. So can we just take a look at how we can get that done too, if my colleagues agree that...
If the board would like to direct us, we'll go back and look at how to fashion requests to the Attorney General. You can't vote, this is a board workshop, but we can get a board vote on that, develop that in the future and bring it back as appropriate.
Dr. Robinson?
So I supported that waiver. I support the concept. It just makes me think, what about other categories of employees for other committees, right? And so I'm not trying to go down the slippery slope. I will support the concept of the educator on academic advisory, but I think that maybe each of us needs to give some thought about other categories of employees on these other committees, and where do we draw the line, or if we draw the line.
Sure. Okay. Any other on this one? 109? Okay. Mr. Harris, want to move on?
Sure. Next policy is 1.08, which are expenditure of board members. If you recall, in 2019, there were legislative changes on reimbursement for board members. The vote being taken if you're traveling outside the district, and the processes in the policy, and also if you go outside the state. There's a change in process on reimbursement if the district phones are used for non-public purposes. It's a requirement of timely reporting of expenditures for reimbursements. It revises provisions where travel is reimbursed by another entity, and it specifies payment to professional and educational related membership association dues.
Dr. Robinson?
So review of this policy makes me ask a different question that might be a superintendent to Mike Burke question. But for line 3, so does each board member have the same budget? So it says a budget will be established for each board member in an amount sufficient to cover the board member's expenses. Okay, so.
Mr. Burke is shaking his head yes.
They're currently all equal, the non-salary budgets.
Okay, do you have plans to change that since you added currently to the beginning of the sentence?
No, not without board action.
Good answer, Mr. Burke.
I'd like to
It's
say,
a wise man there. Mrs. Andrews?
and I'd like to say, I was just selected to the executive board for the Council of Great City Schools, which makes my job a little bit more impressive to the extent that I'm traveling a little bit more on behalf of this school board. So I do think that when we have a board member that's serving that is serving at the national level, that Mr. Burke and as well as the school board, we need to consider that so that I won't be pinching and having to spend my own money to cover travel to get educated to help us do a better job. So I think it's something that this board needs to consider.
And follow up to Mrs. Andrews, I agree, maybe the policy should state that board members can apply for additional funding above their budget amount if they're traveling, if the travels on the different committees they're on involve. I mean, somehow we have to work that out. Certainly Mrs. Andrews or any of us that are on these organizations where we have to go out of state shouldn't have to come out of pocket when we're doing that on behalf of the school district. Dr. Robinson?
So that just needs to come to the board. So
Yes.
it needs to come to the board as above allocation expenditure.
Right. But it should be in the policy that that's a possibility because it's not currently in there.
Yeah, currently, it's not in there, but it doesn't say the budgets have to be the same either.
You were supposed to be brief. I wouldn't go down that road.
But I like that because I'm
See,
just
I
in a
told you.
place right now where if I wasn't traveling, just doing state of Florida, I would say it's not a road that I would want to go down. But I do want to go down it now that I'm doing something different.
Mrs. McQuinn?
So not anticipating this part of the discussion, I want to make sure that I say this correctly. So as a board member, so there are those of us who hold offices or positions that we have asked you to represent the board. For me, that would then certainly can come for, request for a waiver. But I want us to look, I'm just going to give an example. I did not ask to go to the great cities. Thank you very much. I knew I was going to mess that up. Because I am sensitive to how it looks to the public if we're all gone somewhere. But next year I want to go. So I'm just saying I'd like for us to look and even maybe have discussion at another time. So certainly if I'm representing, I'll use Ms. Andrews, when she's representing us or Mr. Shaw representing us on things we've asked them to do, that should not count toward a professional development conference that they might want to attend. But I think we have to look at the big picture because I really want to go next year.
All right. Any other discussion on this one? Move on, sir.
Sure. The next one is 1035, policy presentation, and it states the manner and process that new policies or revised policies are brought before the board. This was actually presented at the workshop previously about the various steps that are taken to adopt policies, but I did want to mention two new provisions that weren't in there before, which are the process for incorporating by reference a document which is attached or linked or may be attached at the bottom of the policy. And also it authorizes the superintendent or designee to develop and issue internal instructions, templates, or processes for the development of policies.
Discussion? Okay. Next.
Sure. Policy 1.10, disclosure requirements for board members, certain employees, and advisory committee members. This basically tracks the statute and says how we implement it on the Commission of Ethics forms that need to be filled out, including those who file for financial disclosure, gift reporting, business transactions, conflict of interest, and memorandum of voting conflicts. Per the statutory change, the purchasing spending authority threshold is now $35,000 for filing financial disclosures for other than, of course, board members have to file as well as the superintendent and purchasing. Okay, it changes the location and where to file financial disclosure. It actually clarifies it. It updates the names of departments involved in the process, and it includes 2019 legislative changes for not only staff, but also the Commission on Ethics and Supervisor of Elections, for preparing the list of persons who are required to do financial disclosures and what the consequences are if they're not filed.
Questions? You're on a roll. Keep going.
No, I have a
Last
question.
one.
I don't understand this 35,000 part. What was it before? Or what
I
is it?
believe it was like 20.
And so what is that? What is the 35,000 if?
For a person who, I'm going to give you an example, principal. They actually have authority under our policy of 50,000, so it doesn't impact them, but it might impact some other employees who only had $20,000 and were required to file before with purchasing authority, and now it's up to 35,000, they wouldn't have to file.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
It was a legislative change.
Next.
Last one. Policy 1.10, Statement of Agency, Organization, and Operation. Basically, the scope, it's required by Florida law. It references our statement of school board's organization and operation, and the organizational chart indicates, updates where to locate them, and explains the electronic filing process for someone with the district.
Dr. Robinson?
So this is a little bit of an aside too, but how often should the organizational chart be officially updated?
Well, every time you change a job description that's on that chart, technically you're changing the chart, but we do it when we do the temporary budget adoption as well as the budget adoption.
Okay, and so, all right, so it seems to me that every time we change somebody director level or above, the org chart that's accessible to the public should be updated. Now, is that consistent with or contrary to law, rule, something?
It's certainly consistent with law, but it's not what we do organizationally. I mean, I do not believe that that happens. That would be an internal requirement and could be included in the policy, but it is not at this time.
So it is my request that the board consider some new guidelines about how we operate relative to the organizational chart. My suggestion is whenever the person in the position, director level or above, changes, that the new org chart is maybe attached to the personnel action that's appointing those people, and that we see it so we can approve it as part of that, and then the updated org chart is available for the public on the website. Because a whole lot of things change during the course of the year, and the org chart that's accessible to the public is incorrect for a great period of time.
So let me ask a question, Dr. Robinson, before I ask the board, what they. So if we have somebody that's retiring that's an assistant superintendent and somebody just fills that position, are you suggesting at that point we should have a new org chart if there's not been a change actually in the job descriptions or anything? Just a change in personnel for the same position that was there before?
So I will clarify with legal, the org chart includes names or just positions?
What we're talking about here is only positions. So I would answer your question by saying if someone else is filling that position, there's no change in the org chart. It's if the position's eliminated or some other new position that would be on the chart is created.
So is that consistent with what you suggested, Dr. Robinson? We're only going to ask them to give us a new org chart when there's actually a change in the one of the
structure.
boxes moves or there's.
In the structure.
Yes, in the structure.
That's fine with me. I just think we need to be clear to the public, and then the public would then have to search the employee list to find the person in that position.
If I may, I think, Mr. Harris, the clarification needs to be made that this is about positions, not people's names. So it will never, this organizational chart will never tell the public who's in the spot. if that's what you're getting at.
No, I hear that. And so my question because I'm looking at it from the public's point of view, because it's been brought to me, right? So people change and the structure changes and no one realizes it, right? Well, I mean, we should realize it, but the public, if they're trying to find, for example, like we didn't have a CAO for a while, and this is actually the example. We didn't have a CAO for a while, and so they did not understand that the person that they need to talk to is a CAO because they're telling me that person doesn't exist because the org chart was not up to date, right? So what I'm hearing is that the org chart would then, in this example, include the CAO, and then they would just have to search our website to find who is the CAO. I'm fine with that. I just think
So if I understand you correct, I actually think we're attempting to do that. I think whenever we move the boxes, then we should make that public. And so we've actually been trying to do a better job of that when we bring new job descriptions forward, I think, as requested of the board members. So I don't know, I honestly don't know if it's a policy thing or just a procedure that we need to change and put into practice as an executive team who makes the decisions on changing boxes. So I'm good either way, but I'll be glad to do that as a practice within our team.
Ms. McQuinn?
So I was not going to add a comment because I totally get it about changing or moving boxes. That's great. And I'm hoping, yes. So now in response to Dr. Fenoy, do we have written procedures for all of our policies? So where would it be in a procedure? If we're not making it in policy, where would it be written in procedure?
So the first answer is no, we do not have written procedures for every policy. I'm trying to figure out how long it would take us to write a procedure for every policy. But on this one, I think maybe that's something Ed and I can start thinking about, is how do we start to document the appropriate procedures? And, it's a really good point, because actually Dr. Carver brought it up today. We need to start documenting how we want things to function as it relates to the board's policies, just in case many of us move on in the future, we don't reinvent the wheel every time there's a transition of leadership. And so I actually think it might be a project we can work on moving forward.
Okay, haven't done this in a while, but going back to the old days and when I had the privilege of working in area offices that are now regional offices, we had procedures attached to any policy that would require a procedure. Okay, so we really did have policies and procedures. So I think that's something we might want to work on again. It just helps us with consistency. Thank you.
Speaking of old days, Mrs. McQuinn, happy birthday. This past Monday was your birthday, so happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You don't look a day over 35, so it's great. Who had their hand up over here? I saw somebody's hand go up. Oh, it was, I'm sorry, Mrs. Rico.
No, just on this policy and procedures thing, and I know Mr. Harris has provided guidance on what the APA requires insofar as policies, because there really are items that must be in policy, and there's a legal criteria for that. Procedures, and we don't want to morph things that should be in policy into procedures. Implementation of policies is another story. So I think that we can probably revisit that guidance and send it out before the next time we meet.
Mr. Shaw.
You said old. This is going to take us back to probably nobody in the room realizes how this change was ever made. But at one point in time, we had a policy book and an administrative directives book. And both those books were like 5, 6, 7, 8 inches high. And what Ms. Rico just said about that confusion between policies and directives led to the district making that change. And the change was made to do simply get rid of administrative directives so that the administrative directives were tied into the policies, and that the administrative procedures that were used district-wide became the bulletins that were issued to administrators. And that eliminated that confusion. So, from my humble opinion on this one, we don't want to go there. We need those procedures, But it may be that the solution is simply to review what goes in bulletins and do it that way. But I don't ever want to see us go back to big books of administrative directives, because it was a nightmare because they were conflicting. So,
Dr. Fennoy?
So what I would like to do is give a directive to Ed Tierney to put this on our executive cabinet agenda so that we can talk. The word that I would use are protocols to follow through on board's procedures. We actually talked about this at our executive retreat on Monday. So Ed, put that on our executive cabinet retreat for discussion, and we'll bring some discussion.
Any other questions on this? All right, Mr. Superintendent, we're ready for the next. Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Thank you.
School police policy workshop.